Hello everyone, welcome to my lecture on Victorian age. Victorian age spans from 1837 and it ends in 1901 with the death of Queen Victoria. The age was very quiet in terms of war. There were no major wars that took place. Another important event that happened was the passing of Reform Bill. Reform Bill was passed in 1832, which changed the voting rights. Another important event that occurred was the Great Exhibition, which was held in Crystal Palace, Hyde Park, London from 1st May to 15th October 1851. The major characteristics of Victorian age. First, Victorian compromise. Now, what is Victorian compromise? Earlier, people believed that man has been made by God. Suddenly, Charles Darwin came up with his publication of Origin of Species in 1859, which transformed this mentality, and Charles Darwin made clear that we have evolved as a human species. So there was a kind of rift between religion and science. People did not know what to believe in. This is generally called Victorian compromise. They were in a state of compromise, not knowing which side to believe in. Regarding this, Matthew Arnold in 1855, he wrote in his poem Stanzas from Grand Chartreuse, he wrote within quotes, "Wandering between the two worlds, one dead, the other powerless to be born," quote close. So this shows the rift, the kind of indecisiveness whether to choose religion or whether to choose science. There was also a rift between aristocracy and democracy. With the change in voting rights, England was gradually moving towards a democratic form of government, but Queen Victoria was still the nominal head. So there was a rift between aristocracy and democracy, along with a rift between religion and science, and this is generally known as Victorian compromise. The second important feature of Victorian literature or Victorian age is industrialization. Now imagine you produce clothes at your own house and you sell it. The entire profit goes on to you. You become the sole master of all the profit. Now suddenly suppose an industry is set up where the productivity has increased 4 times and nobody is buying the clothes that you produce by sewing it by your own hand. So in this case, what will happen? The demand for cheap labor will increase. The entire profit will go to the master of those industries, the mill owners. So with the advent of science, with the advent of many machines, with the changing world scenario, cheap labor, the demand for cheap labor increased, the rich became richer, the poor became poorer, and as a result of this industrialization, the gap between rich and poor increased. And this is also evident in the literature of Victorian age. For example, if you see the works of Charles Dickens, you will see this topic is discussed in intricate detail. He discusses the concepts of child labor, he discusses the concept of cheap labor, depicting women and children as cheap laborers. He depicts how people were used as hands, the workers were used as hands and not as human beings. So this development of industries and the setup of industries, and with the mill owners owning the industries, the gap between the rich and poor increased. As an impact of industrialization, there was a huge rift between rich and poor, and this is depicted, as I said, in the works of many authors of that age. Another important feature of this age is the rise of novels. So with the rise of middle class, with the gap increasing between rich and poor, there was a new class that developed, that was the middle class. There was advancement in printing technology, which made printing easier, faster, and more accessible. So there was more demand of a literature that was easier to read and that was more enjoyable than poetry. So there was a rise of novel, and hence this age saw a great rise in the number of novel writers. The main theme of these novels was social realism, which becomes another important feature of Victorian age. So, what did the writers discuss in their writings? They discussed the rampant issues of the society so that people could relate to it, and so that these novels sold properly. So, the social realism, the reality of society, the issues ravaging the society became an important theme of such novels. Another important feature of this age is the rise of women novelists, and also the condition of women. Now, women were either angels of the house or demons of the house. So they were either angelized or demonized, and they did not hold an individual identity in the Victorian household. And women novelists saw a rise, but the problem was that nobody wanted to read novels written by a woman. So we have an example of George Eliot, whose actual name was Mary Ann Evans, but nobody wanted to buy a book written by a woman novelist. So she had to change her name into George Eliot so that people would not know whether this is a male writer or a female writer, and would presume the writer to be male and hence buy books written by her. So these became important features of Victorian age. Another important feature was treatment of sex. So today the term Victorian connotes a prudish refusal to admit the existence of sex. In 19th century, sex was a topic which was not very much talked about, and homosexuality was a crime. The society lived in double standards where men wanted and needed sex, but women could only procreate but never want sex. For women, it was just a kind of procreation and not a recreation. So today when we talk about the term Victorian, we talk about this double standards of society, this old school sort of a belief where people do not talk about certain things openly, where propriety and impropriety was a major issue. So these become the basic features of Victorian age. I would repeat it in short. First, Victorian compromise, which was a compromise between the world of religion and world of science, between a world of aristocracy and a world of democracy. Another, industrialization. With the advent of technology, bigger industries were being set up, labor became cheap, rich became richer, poor became poorer, and hence the rift happened. Third, rise of poverty as a result of industrialization. Fourth, rise of novels as a result of rise in middle class, as a result of advancing in printing technology, which made books accessible and faster to produce. Fifth, social realism as a major theme of such novels. Sixth, rise of women novelists. And seventh, treatment of sex, where sex was just a method of procreation for women and never a source of recreation, and where people did not want to talk about sex openly. Now we move on to major poets of Victorian age. First among them, and the most important, is Alfred Lord Tennyson. So Tennyson in 1850 became the poet laureate in succession to William Wordsworth, and he has written a lot of poems of prime importance. First among them is The Princess, where he talks about the condition of women during Victorian age. And in that poem he has written, men for the field, women for the hearth, man for the sword, and needle for she, which clearly depicts the domestic roles that was assigned to women and the role men played outside, working outside the house, where they became the breadwinners and women were supposed just to work inside the household. His another important poem is In Memoriam, written in 1850, published in 1850, and it is an elegy on the death of his dear friend Arthur Henry Hallam. Another important poem by him is The Lotus Eaters. Also, Tithonus is one of the major poems written by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Another important writer of this age is Robert Browning, who was very famous for writing dramatic monologues. Now, what is a dramatic monologue? Dramatic monologue is a genre of poetry where a poem depicts a story and where the speaker is essentially not the poet. So that speaker generally narrates a story in that poem in the presence of a silent listener, and through that speech he unfolds his own character, and the readers realize that he is actually a criminal psychopath. So in a dramatic monologue, the speaker, one, is not the poet, he is a criminal psychopath mostly, and he speaks in front of a silent listener. Browning explored this genre very beautifully, and his important poems are My Last Touches, Fra Lippo Lippi, Rabbi Ben Ezra, Caliban upon Sebetos, Porphyria's Lover, etc. Also, he was a very optimistic sort of a poet. He was very optimistic about the changes that were happening in the society. So he said, in one of his poems, he said, quote, God is in heaven, everything is right with the world, unquote. So this line beautifully tells you how optimistic he was about the changes that were occurring. Another important poet of this age was Matthew Arnold, and he was a pessimist. He was not very happy with the changes that were occurring, and in his work he says, Rabbi Ben Ezra, in his work, A Summer Night, he says there are only two ways to live, life of a slave and life of a free man. So he was not very happy with the changes that were occurring. He was dissatisfied with the contemporary society. And his important poems are Dover Beach, The Scholar Gypsy, Thyrsis, which is again an elegy, just like the poem by Tennyson. So in Thyrsis, he writes an elegy for his friend A.G. Clarke. Another important poem is Sohrab and Rustam. Apart from being a great poet, he was also a great critic, and his important critical works are Culture and Anarchy, Essays in Criticism, Literature and Dogma, and Study of Poetry. Apart from all these poets, another very important poet of this age was Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who was the wife of Robert Browning. And her one very important work is Sonnet from the Portuguese, which was actually a collection of love sonnets she wrote for her dear husband. And there she very clearly says that her love for husband is more than her love for God, which thematicizes a very important aspect of that age, and that was people's dwindling faith in God. Her another important work is Aurora Leigh, which is also considered as an early feminist text. So this is all for today's lecture. In the next lecture, we will talk about the pre-Raphaelite poetry and also Victorian novels. Thank you. For any doubts, you can write on the comment section. If you like the video, please press the like button and share it as much as possible with the students in need. Thank you so much.